Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Surfside Recovery Podcast. My name is Brian Licata, and we just wanted to let you guys know that if you or anyone is struggling with addiction, to please reach out to Surfside. You can give us a call at 609-709-4205 or visit us at surfside.org and all of our social media platforms. All right, you guys ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Surfside Recovery Podcast. We missed you. I'm sure you missed us.
Season 3.
Season 3. My name is this is episode 39 total. My name is Brian Licata, alongside Mr. Ian Koch and our new friend over here. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, Devin Reaves here from the Pennsylvania Harm Reduction Coalition.
Well, thanks for coming down. I know we've spoke a couple times over the phone. I really honestly don't have any idea what you do. So
I don't really know either.
Which is a good thing because now you can tell everybody what you do.
Devin is a professional sneaker collector.
Correct. I do have an excellent sneaker collection of Nike SBs and Air Force Ones.
So Devin, fun fact, we were at a conference in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And Devin had a pair of sneakers that is a highly sought after pair of sneakers. That the funny thing is, you wouldn't know unless you knew. But if you know,
right?
Type of thing,
right?
And Devin had like a semi-nice business casual outfit on, and then this doofy pair of sneakers. I was like, what do you know about those? And so we got talking, which was funny. And he was very shocked that I knew something about
Is that
sneakers.
how you guys met?
No, we knew each other I think when Surfside opened, you were working for Life of Purpose, I think.
We first met when you were opening up Surfside, maybe at one of those Recovery Housing Association meetings.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd heard about you, and everybody was like, oh, he's all right for a Jersey guy. And we just kind of hit it off.
PA, though.
Technically, but a lot of people don't know that.
Right. But we just kind of hit it off. I appreciated his no bullshit attitude, which is something I try to be.
Yeah, he definitely...
It's the spit and vinegar.
I once bought a pair of Jordans off a kid at a bar, and I made him take the shoes off.
Really?
I gave him the cash, and then gave him the sneakers I was wearing.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a good deal.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad deal. So thanks for coming down. So you're from Pennsylvania? And
I'm
you do your work in Pennsylvania?
Originally from Washington State. I'm an Army brat, so I've moved around, but I've lived in Pennsylvania longer than any place else in the Philly metro area for a long time.
Right. So what is it specifically that you guys do at your employer?
Yeah. So I'm the executive director and founder of the Pennsylvania Harm Reduction Coalition, and really what we're looking to do is address the overdose epidemic and the racist war on drugs on the municipal, county, state, and sometimes the federal level. Mm-hmm. We know that it's killing 70,000 people a year. And we keep doing things that don't work and keep avoiding things that do work because they're fringy or unpopular.
Right. So what are some of those things that are fringy or unpopular for the people who don't know what we're talking about?
Sure. So, we spend a lot of time talking about expanding access to sterile syringes. And a lot of people are like, you mean like needle exchanges? And I'm like, yeah. Excuse me.
That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And... well, and they'll say things like, well, giving people needles just makes it easier for them to use drugs. And people who have never, shot heroin are the people that say things like that. Because once you start, using drugs IV, it's really hard to go back to sniffing or other routes of administration. And whether you have a sterile syringe or not, you're still going to use it.
Right.
And, a lot of people think what we have is an opioid epidemic when what we actually have is a syndemic, and a syndemic is two or more epidemics kind of coming together to make it even worse, right? So we have an overdose epidemic because most people are dying of not just opioids, but of polysubstance use, and we're seeing stimulants going through the roof being part of that profile, and then also communicable disease. So HIV, hepatitis C is up all across the country, and those things together are leading to people getting HIV, hepatitis C, endocarditis, heart problems.
So what's interesting about some of the stuff that Devin is doing is that there was this major push, 20 years ago, we'll say, with methadone clinics. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of people don't realize, understand, have been paying attention to is that heroin was a huge problem after Vietnam.
Yep.
And so methadone became popular and methadone clinics became popular, not to give people, quote unquote, that idea of like maintenance, but it was to reduce overall harm in the community.
That's right.
And so to reduce Hep C, HIV. So the idea of like giving people, a substance or a clean needle is not necessarily contributing to get high, because like, and I know, and Devin knows, like, if you're going to get high, you're going to get high. Like,
right.
When it gets bad enough, you'll get help. But at least if in the process of you burning your life to the ground, you don't necessarily burn everybody else's life down with you. So that's kind of the fundamental premise behind it.
Right. It's a public health perspective, right? We're not looking at one person, we're looking at the community, the nation, because when one person gets HIV, it affects everybody, right? Because it doesn't just stay in the drug using circle. Somebody will contract HIV, they'll find recovery, they'll get well. They sadly most likely won't be tested at a treatment center, and then they'll maybe get their girlfriend will contract HIV, or some other lover, and then she'll several other people will contract it,
and so on.
Right. I mean, that's how these things work.
So what are the main objectives that you hear to people when you're trying to talk about that? Because I mean, I remember I had an employer one time who was a former police officer in Atlantic City, and he knew I was in recovery, and he asked me what my thoughts were on harm reduction. They're probably similar to what you think. I mean, I personally think it's a good idea. I remember living out in California that, I had an incident with a pharmacist when I was trying to buy syringes, and she didn't want to sell them to me. And I knew the law in California, and I knew it was pharmacist discretion at that point. And I said to the lady pretty bluntly that I said, you not selling this to me is only going to make me use the same one I've been using for 2 weeks.
Right.
So if you don't want to sell it to me, fine. Ugh. Or you can just sell it to me, and I can use a new one.
Right.
And she ended up selling it to me.
Good.
After I told it to her like that.
Yeah. So, our biggest arguments in favor of syringe service programs or just sterile syringe distribution is, number one, people that engage with syringe service programs and needle exchange program are 5 times more likely to enter treatment. If there was some other intervention that made people 5 times more likely to enter treatment, it'd be on every corner in America. Number two, people that engage with syringe service programs are more likely to have naloxone and be saved by a dose of naloxone, right? Because they're excellent at distributing naloxone.
You can't get sober if you're dead.
Fucking A. Can't get sober if you're dead. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to curse here, but I'm just going to go with it.
100%, yeah.
And, the other big thing we talk about is a syringe costs 8 cents. And treating somebody for hepatitis C, $80,000. HIV for their lifetime, $400,000. An infectious, disease, like an abscess or something like that, several $1,000s. Getting an infection in your heart, several $100,000. I mean, it's not only the right thing to do from a compassionate and human-centered space,
from
but
a
it's also
business standpoint, it's a no-brainer.
Financially, it's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things you guys have done in the area that you're at to kind of push this forward? I mean, I know Philadelphia has a pretty, I don't want to say large, but they have harm reduction sites and stuff like that.
Yeah. So the largest needle exchange or syringe service program in the country is in Philadelphia, Prevention Point Philadelphia. It's been around for about 25 years. We have another one in Pittsburgh called Prevention Point Pittsburgh. They're more like sister organizations. And then another 14 or so underground needle exchanges throughout the state. So we work.
When you say underground, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by underground, in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's local laws that authorize them to exist. In some other places like Lancaster, Pennsylvania, it's more of a, we know you're here, we're not going to arrest you for doing this, but you're not legally allowed to do that. And so one of our main goals in Pennsylvania is to change the state law to allow syringe service programs to operate. And I spent a lot of time in Harrisburg working on that.
So what are some of the other services that these places offer other than, because I think there's a misconception that people just think that you bring a needle in, you get one back, sort of thing. Like what else is there?
Yeah. So, the biggest misnomer is that it should be a 1-for-1 exchange, right? We want to flood the street with as many syringes as possible. So, Prevention Point Philadelphia gave out, I think, 3 million syringes last year. But the problem is that that's not enough syringes, and HIV is still on the rise in Pennsylvania. So we actually want to see them give several million more. And because people are afraid to get caught with a syringe, they throw it away because they may be charged with paraphernalia, or if a cop comes across them, he'll take it. And so, number one, we want to dispel the idea that it should be exchanged. Number two, a good syringe service program is offering a myriad of services, and Prevention Point Philadelphia is a great example of that. They have an HIV clinic.
That's only $90,000 in syringes.
That's right.
That's not bad.
No,
that's a lot. That's a hell of a lot of syringes.
Listen to this.
But still, that's really not bad from a perspective where, right, like what is the savings, right? What's the ROI on savings?
So the University of Washington GW just did a study on the data for the first 10 years of Prevention Point and calculated that Prevention Point saved the city of Philadelphia $246 million a year by being in existence.
That's crazy. So they give you a raise?
No, not yet.
They should have.
So does anybody ever bring up the fact that, like, I know people that I used to buy syringes off of in the street of Philadelphia were gaining money because they would get syringes from the clinic and then sell them for $1, which would then fuel the addiction. Like, I know that was a really, really popular hustle. Yeah,
I think that's a narrative, secondary exchange is what I would call that, is a vital part of this. And in reality, what I'd love to do is pay people to be around at 9 o'clock at night to give out sterile syringes. But there's a federal ban on funding syringes. So, that's becomes a very hard thing to do. So number one, I respect his hustle. Right. You know what I mean? Number two, we want him doing that, because if he's not out there selling them, you're not going to get them.
Right.
Because the syringe service program closes at 5 o'clock.
Right.
But back to your previous question, the other services they offer: HIV clinic, hepatitis C clinic, testing, linkage to care. They have several recovery coaches on staff, so are helping people begin and sustain their recovery.
Case management.
Yep. Like they also have a respite house. And so what that means is a lot of shelters won't let you in if you're on drugs, right? You got to be sober before you can have some place to sleep. And that's why so many people sleep outside. So they have a low barrier housing program, which is really reaching the people that no other programs are reaching. And it really just a myriad of other services as well.
Now, how's all this stuff funded? Like, where does the funding come from?
So, Prevention Point Philadelphia gets a lot of funding from the city, but they also are getting federal funds, philanthropic dollars. I mean, they are on the hustle 24/7.
Right. Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know all that. Is there anything else you think that like people don't know, should know, sort of things?
Well, I think when we talk about syringe service programs, I think the next logical leap is supervised consumption spaces, which is has been on the news recently. I
know they're doing it in Vancouver, Switzerland.
Yep, Australia. And so it was just in the news recently because the governor of Chicago allocated $4.3 million to study and open up supervised consumption facilities.
And they just legalized marijuana too.
Right.
I think like all
Correct.
in the same type of,
Yep.
I don't want to say the same bill, but all in the same process.
Right. Just in the beginning of this year, January 2020, it became legal for recreational cannabis. He also waivered like tens of thousands of people out of jail who had minor marijuana convictions.
Yeah, it's a real interesting thing when and I think that might be a thing that scares a lot of people is if you're giving away syringes, like what else is going to happen. So I think a lot of people who are they're concerned that if you start, it could be like a real slippery slope. Like what's the next step from there? You legalize weed, you legalize heroin, you legalize coke, and I think that's what people are scared of.
Honestly, my personal opinion is I think legalization of marijuana is worse than giving out syringes. Like my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
because of what I'm seeing with like young adults and psychosis and. Like they're not smoking dirt weed,
right?
They're like smoking a ton of dabs and they're losing their mind, literally,
right?
So you're basically taking an 18-year-old who it doesn't really, not even 18 potentially, doesn't know the risks, and you're screwing up the rest of their life. Where if someone's already using heroin, it's like they're already there, so you might as well at least give them a clean needle to move forward. But I don't know.
No, I think there's a lot to unpack there. So let's just talk about, drug policy in general, right? We want to minimize the harms of our current drug policy whenever possible. Hence the idea of harm reduction. People that are 18 should be really careful about using substances because their prefrontal cortex, their brain's not fully developed, and that could change the way their brain operates forever. And we have a lot of kind of, parent groups who are saying cannabis is the devil, right? And that's not true, right? There's plenty of adults that can use cannabis recreationally, not like people who have substance
same
use.
as drinking a beer.
Right. Same as drinking a beer, right? And in a lot of ways, alcohol kills way more people than cannabis or heroin combined, or heroin rather. But, it's a illegal substance. And then when we look at, on the other side of the coin, kind of cannabis reformers are like, cannabis is 100% safe. That is also not true.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's somewhere in the middle. But the idea that the state has the right to tell you what you can and cannot put into your body is bullshit, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the one thing that I think about, when they're talking about like regulation of cannabis and stuff like that, like it's just going to screw something up. You know what I mean? Like when my personal opinion, when the government gets their hands in all these things, it starts to turn afoul.
Sure, and I'm not here for the Apple of pot, for the
Right.
Google of pot. I don't trust them at all. And I think we should be wary about that. But when we take that to the next level to more stigmatized substances like heroin or crack cocaine or methamphetamines, what we need to realize is that one of the reasons that methadone was so successful is that people could meet their biological need for the substance without having to rob and steal. It connected them to services, and crime rates went down for those people. And there's definitely a line of logic that is not outlandish, that if we are giving people heroin that they are going to use regardless, they're not going to be stealing their mama's TV. They're not going to be out mugging people. And we don't want to just, give them these drugs and leave them out there. We want to engage them continuously on a path to recovery, because using drugs for some people is a totally survival mechanism. If you've grown up with intergenerational poverty, intergenerational trauma, we're going to be surprised when people self-medicate with drugs.
So is that one of the things involved in the consumption areas is distribution as well?
No. So, when I talk about what a syringe service program does, right? It gives gives somebody a lot of the things they need to stay safe when they're using drugs. And then we send them into the alley to use drugs alone, and then they're likely to overdose and die. So let's up the protection factor and bring them inside and monitor their substance use. But even then, they're bringing in their own drugs. And it's not like there's chemists mixing this up.
Right.
When they're, it's a guy with a whisk and a metal bowl, and who knows what he's putting in it or she's putting in it. And so the distribution of sterile or of processed drugs, there's an argument to be made for that.
There you go. You keep talking.
So what's your thought on Suboxone or buprenorphine or Subutex?
Sure. So, if I was the drug czar of the land, I would send out guys, people to set up right across the street from drug dealers with Suboxone. So many people at the end stages of their substance use disorder are not using heroin or fentanyl or whatever they're buying for fun. You're using it to maintain.
Sure.
And what we want to reach as a culture is we want to reach Suboxone saturation, right? So we eliminate the market for heroin. And that's not what we do. We do the exact opposite in our country. And if we look to France, which did that in the 90s, their overdose deaths dropped greatly. We as a country and a state and a region, it's not like we don't know what to do. It's that we lack the political will to make it happen.
So what is it that France that France did in the 90s.
Yeah, so they just made it rain Suboxone.
Okay.
It would really be what they did. So, and we've done quite the opposite here in America. So any doctor in America can write thousands of scripts for powerful opioids that will physically make anybody dependent if they take it for enough days in a row.
Right.
But you have to get a special X waiver, which requires 8 hours of training. And even if you get that, you're only allowed to prescribe a handful of people. Yeah. It's like 30 people the first year, 100 people the second year, and 200 people the third year. The Philadelphia prison, people that are getting out of prison are at the highest risk of overdose, right? They die at 40 to 120 times the general public. One of the interventions we advocate for is expanding access to medications for opioid use disorder inside of the prisons. And they didn't have enough X-waiver doctor slots to meet the need. I mean, that's a stupid problem.
Right, I hear what you're saying. So kind of like in layman's terms, it's pretty much that these people have been in prison for or jail for X amount of time, ideally probably off drugs unless they were getting high on the inside, and then they come out, use, overdose, right? So you're saying is that the doctors don't have like that whatever that waiver thing, the X waiver, I guess, in the Philadelphia prison system in order to be able to prescribe it to people.
So they can't prescribe enough that's necessary.
That meets the needs, right?
Got it.
So, and I
also
also
it's the same thing in the general public, right?
Sure. So I also want to say this because, we typically on this podcast are talking about like abstinence-based recovery, and things of that nature. And I think it's really important to mention that. So ultimately what we're talking about right now is harm reduction.
Yes.
Devin may or may not agree, don't particularly care. At one point in time, they were very, recovery and harm reduction were very, very separate topics. And harm reduction was everything we're talking about, right? It's about reducing the harm, not only done to the person, but to everybody around. Mm-hmm. And then there was recovery, which is more of like your abstinence-based 12-step model, go from no degree to bachelor's degree to get a job, family, succeed, blah, 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 blah. Where harm reduction, the idea was more about just stop getting arrested. Like, stop getting arrested, don't transmit HIV to anybody. Somewhere along the line, those became the same idea to some extent. And I think for me, it's really important to say this, especially because I know there's like some new guys and girls who watch this podcast. Like, we're not necessarily promoting that you just stop what you're doing and go get on Suboxone or go get on methadone. Like, we have to ultimately remember that the idea of utilizing these things is the Band-Aid to keep somebody alive and out of jail for them to bridge the gap and potentially get to recovery. Where, I worked at this methadone clinic for 3 years, and out of 65 clients that I had on my caseload, 3 tried to get off methadone, 2 successfully got off. Right. A lot came down on their dose, but their goal in life was to get a disability or unemployment check, which was approximately $750 a month, to get $100 on food stamps, and just to kind of maintain. It was a different mindset of the 22-year-old who's been in treatment 4 times and really wants to get through college and really wants to have a family and move forward. The folks at the methadone clinic, and not to say that most of them had families, they were older, but their motivation to really go and succeed was just not there. Not to say not for nothing, one of those guys, was on that clinic, came off methadone, worked for me, has absolutely excelled in life. Not to say that it can't, but that was the point, right?
Sure.
The methadone kept him alive long enough for him to kind of bridge the gap onto, bigger and better things. And does that make sense? I'm not trying to bash anything. So I'm just trying to be clear.
So
there's a difference.
So I am a person in recovery, right? I went to AA for many, many years. Don't go to as many meetings as I used to, but I still go to meetings. I've got 12 years in recovery. My sobriety date is August 21st, 2007. And AA as a philosophy and its disciple fellowships saved my life, right? But AA as a philosophy, which is designed for middle-aged, middle-class white dudes whose livers were falling out because of alcoholism.
Have you ever looked at the membership surveys?
No.
Oh, dude, you'd love them.
Okay.
50%. So I think 17 was the most recent.
Right.
50% of people in Alcoholics Anonymous are white men between the ages of 40 and 60.
Right. I mean, it sounds about right.
And so when you look at the demographic that Surfside works with, right, under 35,
Right.
it's some ridiculous thing like 1% of Alcoholics Anonymous is under 21.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like,
right. It's not that it's bad, right? But in an age of fentanyl,
we need to help people stay alive.
We can't say things like, go out and try to shoot dope like a gentleman. You can't say that.
And we can't say things like, you just need to pray that away.
Right. And I do believe in the spiritual aspect. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that
it's
number
two
one,
different models.
Right. And they can work together. I mean,
we've had great results on guys
somebody
on
Suboxone and methadone is 50% less likely to die of an opioid use disorder. Yeah. I would like to see us go to a medication first perspective. Like we should be putting people on 6-month tapers, 9-month tapers, not a 3-day taper.
But you're also saying taper.
Sure.
So again, the idea of taper is that they're eventually going to come off.
Right. And again, that gives us the option to, you were a clinician. Can you remember a time where a client was ready for a real crisis in their first 6 weeks of recovery?
Dude, me and you are on the same page. And
right.
I think that's what's so good about this is like, because, right, like the idea, it's a different mindset and it's hard, I think, to communicate that. Like, yes, do I think, like I have recently encouraged somebody to stay on a low dose of Suboxone.
Excellent.
Because they are a fucking disaster, period.
Right.
And they need to get their head out of their rear end before they try to get off that.
Right.
Like it's, and I think that's the thing is like at Surfside, we've had really good results with guys on Suboxone, but the difference is that they want recovery.
Sure.
They don't just want the pill or the quick fix. They want to participate in the abstinence space. They want to work steps, find a spiritual connection, rebuild their, like they want to do all that stuff.
Right.
And so prior, when I was at the methadone clinic, I worked at an IOP that did pretty much Suboxone maintenance up in New Hampshire at one point. The difference in those two perspectives is at Surfside, to get in, the prerequisite is not, are you on meds or not? The prerequisite is like, this is the program. Right. If you happen to be on Suboxone, fine, but this is the program. Where those other places was like, you only had to take the med, right? And people didn't want to do all that other stuff. Right. So they didn't get the desired result that they could have gotten potentially, right? Based on their own personal motivation and things like that.
And what we know is that people so there's the ultimate program we want, right? Medicine, psychiatry, psychology, case management, social work, wrapped around an individual. Number one, that is hard to find financially for most people. And just the medication is better than shooting dope. And so, I'm okay if somebody's just doing medicine, and the intervention of the social worker, the clinician, the helper is supposed to help somebody move along the process to wellness. And I think the other thing that's coming up for me is, 22-year-old suburbanite kids are going to be a different profile of life experiences, goals, expectations than the methadone clinic in North Philly.
Yeah.
If I've been beaten down by society, by police, intergenerational trauma, I read on an 8th grade level, just surviving, when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some people are still at those bottom rungs, and a good helper
can identify that.
Can identify that and move people along the process. But for too long, we've said AA is the answer for everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think it is obviously more nuanced than that, right? I believe in homogenous clinical populations because it becomes easier to work with them and motivate them.
How do you feel about, kind of same topic, but kind of different? How do you feel about the qualifications of current staff in not only treatment centers but case management roles, and the people who should be identifying who gets what type of help and how to move in that direction.
I think that that's a really important topic. Is
I could
what are
do a
the
whole podcast on
qualifications?
that.
Right. What are the qualifications of
Talk
the
about it
helpers?
on everyone.
Right. What we're seeing a lot is the proliferation of the recovery coach, and I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. Especially with the overdose epidemic, we're seeing a lot of recovery coaches in ERs. And, in my mind, the way that should work is I meet with you at the hospital after you've overdosed, and I start building a relationship. I follow up with you a couple of days later, whether you're in treatment or you're at home. You get out of treatment, I take you to your first meeting, right? And not to replace the role of a sponsor, but to help guide somebody on the pathway to recovery, because people in early recovery are a lot of fucking work. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing recovery coaches doing level of assessment needs, right? Or a level of like doing clinical assessments, like what level of care you should be in, which is way outside of their scope of practice. And that is really scary. And we also see a whole slew of master's level clinicians working in addiction because they can't get jobs anywhere else and they don't know anything. I have a master's degree in social work from Penn, pretty good social work school, one of the top in the country. And a girl I went to social work school with works with people who have autism. I don't know shit about autism, right? I can't work in an autism clinic, but she also couldn't work in an addiction clinic. Working with people that have substance use disorder requires specialized training, and it's not happening on the job, and it's not happening in school, and that's a big area of concern for everybody.
Yeah, and I think so. What I talk about a lot is the fast growth in treatment centers, and in Jersey and Pennsylvania, right? You can be a counselor if you sign up to take the CADC courses.
Sure.
You're a counselor intern,
Right?
And then they can get reimbursement for that. To me, that's crazy.
You should have a master's degree, in my opinion.
At least if you have a master's degree, you should have counseling skills.
Right,
Forget your specializations. Right. Forget if you know about addiction or not. But at least you have good counseling skills.
And even beyond that, you should have a good background in psychopathology. And psychopathology is the cause and the diagnosis of mental health concerns. I mean, 12-step fellowships have a long history, and even to today, telling people, well, you're not sober because you're on depression meds. Yeah. Or, you wouldn't be depressed if you were, did your first step the right way. And we need to be able to tease out, is Johnny not getting out of bed because he's fucking depressed or because he's dope sick? And putting clinical interventions in place that makes sense.
Or even if, because what we also see too is like, Johnny's on 7 different medications.
Right.
And the person prescribing, instead of like actually looking at like in the reverse of what you're saying, is Johnny depressed because he's never been able to hold a job, can't get a girlfriend, hasn't gotten laid in months or years. Right. And so instead they just keep giving him different medications, and now he's got diarrhea, so they give him more medications, and now he hasn't pooped for 3 days.
Right.
So
and
now he's
grumpy. Can't get hard. Right.
Yeah. Like,
Right.
I mean, so it's like we have such a mess of problems on our hand, and again, like I can talk about the problem more than I can talk about the solution, because I don't even know what the solution will be.
Sure,
we don't have enough people with quality training even close to the need.
It's probably because people just don't want to do it. Like that's one of the reasons that I stopped working for you in the capacity I did, because it sucks. Like it sucks. I mean, for me, it sucked.
Being a halfway house manager?
Well, I mean, like, so...
He's doing case management.
Yeah. And I always say that, knowing what I know now, I would have done the house manager job all over again, because it was fantastic for me. Sure. Like, I really didn't have any other options. I got a stable job, and I got to, like, immediately help people, right?
And
I got
a place to live.
Yeah, I got my rent paid for. I got my food paid for. It was
and money on top of it. Yeah.
And money on top of it. It was the best
early recovery
possible
job
outcome I could have ever had.
Yeah.
Right? But like the longer I stayed into it, the more and more and more I got tired of, like, one kid I remember
the bullshit.
Yeah, like this one kid. I hope he listens to this. So I'm sitting.
Is he still sober?
He's still sober.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm sitting there. I'm typing on the computer, and I'm sitting at the head of the table, and there's a 3-foot clock on the wall right here. He comes up to me. He can either look down at me or up towards the clock. And he's like, hey, do you know what time it is? And I'm like, there's a clock right there. But it's like that stuff is stuff with my personality that irritates me to absolutely no end. And that's why I didn't want to do it. That's why I got out of it. You know?
Well,
and especially for at which rates that people pay in this industry, like it's like there's no way.
It's tough.
Right. And so that is a really important point, right? Having a pathway to growth as an early career professional in this field has financial burdens. You know, going to school, getting a bachelor's degree, getting a master's degree, time burdens that don't match with your emotional maturity, right? So, you know, I used to run a recovery house, Brotherly Love House, and the house manager is the single most important position in the house. I don't care what anybody says. That's the guy, right? And they got to be recovered, but not too recovered, right? They don't got to have their shit sewed. Right, they can't have their shit sewed together where they could like, fuck this, I'm going to get my own place. I got a girl, right? But they also have to have that early recovery fire, right? And after
Terrence, Tom, Matt, you guys are doing great.
Right.
Just so you know.
And I had the same thing going on.
You were great.
But as soon as I got a girlfriend, as soon as I started making more money, I'm like, I'm out.
Right. And so there has to be in our industry a next step for you that doesn't require a 4-year college degree.
And that's the job you took.
Yeah, it's what put me in.
And you know, as a state or a society, we need to make sure we do things to make that possible. And we haven't always done a good job with that.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's gaps in the field and those kind of problems.
I feel like Brian now.
For those of you who can't see at home, Ian has taken the headphones. I'm not really sure how this works.
I'm now in charge.
He's in charge now. Okay.
Is it weird when you hear the voices through your ears and then on the side? It takes a little bit of getting used to.
When I was in grad school,
Who's a DJ?
No, that was after grad school.
Okay.
When I was in grad school, we had to do this assignment around schizophrenia.
Okay.
And they gave us each a tape recorder and a set of headphones. And there was, on a piece of paper, there was like 10 things that we had to do. One was like fill out a piece of paper, all sorts of different things. But we had to wear the headset. And the headset was as if we were schizophrenic and the types of things that were happening. I'll never forget this. So, you know, we start and there's like, you know, some of it's churning, some of it's little voices. Just apparently it's what we were told is it was a lot of schizophrenics here. Unmedicated, obviously. So I go into the bathroom to use the restroom and I go to the urinal and I unzip my fly. And as I was unzipping my fly, the headset says, "Don't touch that." Stop, don't touch that. And I stopped. and I remember very vividly thinking, wait a second, what's going on? That's the headset. So I used the restroom and as I was using the restroom, it continued to go, don't do that. Don't touch that. And it just was like
perfect timing.
That's funny.
But it was incredibly distracting and kind of is how this is. So.
Yeah. I'd love to talk some more about unpacking the difference between harm reduction and recovery a little bit more if you'd be down for that, Ian.
I think we're going to have to do another podcast.
Okay.
Are we
running out of time?
You want to wrap this episode up? And
what are we at?
We're 40 minutes.
Whew.
Yeah. Okay.
Should we roll into episode 2? Should we take a break and then come back?
I got more time.
While we're here.
Yeah. Let me stop everything and start it back over again, and we'll do a second half of an episode.
Cowabunga.
All right, stay tuned. It'll be next week that we'll
the next week of the next week.
Yeah, of the next week. All right, bye.
Peace.
As always, if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to Surfside. You can give us a call at 609-709-4205 or get us on the web at surfside.org.